Chapter 1, Prologue. The French Republic, which achieved a revolution that overturned the old system called Ancien Regime, became the target of all the other powers in Europe. In the aftermath of the revolution, the military officers who were from the nobility vanished, leaving behind only empty shells, and the Republican army became simply a group of idiots. Napoleon Bonaparte I appeared at that time. Napoleon defended his country by defeating all the Allied forces that invaded the French territory despite leading these fools. He also marched west of the Rhine to reclaim the long-cherished French natural border, and, in the heat of the invasion, conquered northern Italy, forming the largest territory for France since Charlemagne. Napoleon was the Republic's savior and the hero who strengthened France. As Napoleon was gaining national popularity and fame, the leaders of the presidential government became jealous and wary of him. In order to topple Britain, the Republic's biggest opponent, the government ordered him to attack India, its colony, and in the process, to capture Egypt. Omitted. Even if we land in Egypt and take down Cairo, we cannot continuously supply the troops to maintain our position. Moving from Egypt to India is impossible, no matter the cost. The operation planned by the government has no possibility of success, and it would be foolish to turn a potential ally of the Republic, the Ottoman Empire, into an enemy. I am not a leader who will drive the Republic's youth to hell. Omitted. Napoleon, who was relieved of his duties because he refused to follow orders, used the media to reach the people and the soldiers. The impact of the sincere words of the Republic's hero was beyond imagination. The people stood up and protested, and intellectuals and the media criticized the government. The Republic's national army was also on Napoleon's side. The panicked government harshly repressed the protesters, giving Napoleon a reason to raise the army. Napoleon used the division that was loyal to him to take over the chaotic Paris, establishing a government under his leadership, and gave himself the position of president. The Legislative Assembly, the National Assembly, and the general government. Everyone did politics for their own interests and power. No one took care of the lives of the people. I will take care of them from now on. The people of the French Republic are those who deserve the protection and respect of the state from the moment they are born. I will make the French people proud of their country wherever they go in the world. After becoming president, Napoleon stopped the war and devoted himself to the internal affairs of the Republic. He worked to revive the economy and industry, while minimizing the outflow of national wealth, corruption, and inefficiency of the administration. As capital began to gather to a certain extent, Napoleon established a state-owned bank, which sought to improve the credibility of the international financial market. His government invested the military expenditure into the quality of life of the people and the revitalization of the national economy, including the construction of canals, roads, and irrigation waterways for the agricultural land development, and the construction of villages and cities. Napoleon judged that cotton looms, spinning machine, cotton cloth, and steam engines, which had been invented in Britain, were the industries that would lead the future world economy. He led the process of copying and improving the British models by bringing together numerous engineers and scientists in France, and established an industrial complex to extract coal from coke furnaces. From 1798 to 1802, when Napoleon was president, the size of the French Republic's economy was more than doubled, the production of iron tripled, and the average income of the people and the national finances grew by 20% annually. The slowing population growth rate rose rapidly again, surpassing 40 million people. The people were no longer starving, and happy laughter poured down the streets and villages. The French considered Napoleon their savior for his mythical achievements and gave him absolute support and praise. The generals, bureaucrats, and ministers urged Napoleon to become emperor. Napoleon refused to do so. Britain was the most wary country as France grew stronger. Especially, looking at France, which dominated the European cotton and wool market by imitating the Industrial Revolution in its own country, Britain even felt a threat for its own survival. Britain spread numerous political lobbying funds to the Schönbrunn Palace, the Potsdam Palace, and St. Petersburg, too, calling for the re-establishment of the anti-French alliance. Britain was not the only country threatened by France's growth, so the coalition, centered around Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, was formed again. 3. I declare the existence and safety of the French Republic. Those who threaten the sovereignty and people of our good republic will be defeated unconditionally, and there will be no compromise. On November 1, 1802, Napoleon declared war on the coalition, which included Britain, Austria, Prussia, Russia, Portugal, and Sweden, on the occasion of the Declaration of Nemours. Soon Napoleon called in his allies Spain and Denmark and asked for troops from the sister republics of France, such as the Batavian Republic and the Parthenopean Republic. It was the beginning of a great war involving almost all European countries. The god of war himself,
Karl Ludwig, 4.
We were just dwarves in the palms of a giant. Alexander I, 5. What strategy can you use against a man who can win an unwinnable battle? William Pitt, 6. Despite not standing on the battlefield for 4 years, Napoleon's strategy and tactics were not rusty at all. He won 10 battles throughout Germany and northern Italy, including the battles of Ulm, Austerlitz, Jena, and Auerstedt, and achieved the feat of suppressing 180,000 of the troops allied against him with only 40,000 losses. 7. Prussia and Austria, which were hit directly, were surprised and quickly asked for a ceasefire. They never stood up to France again. On the other hand, Napoleon judged that it would be hard to beat Britain at sea. Therefore, he only sent the navy to destroy British trading ships and merchant ships, avoiding naval battles as much as possible. It was a strategy to increase the financial burden of Britain, that needed a huge number of ships and sailors in order to block all the French coasts. In the meantime, Napoleon made a tremendous record of killing 115,000 Russian troops in the Battle of Eylau and the Battle of Friedland, and even led Russia to break away from the coalition. Portugal could not fight back against Spain, and Britain was left alone as Sweden slipped away when Russia fell out. Britain's finances were already at their limit after the French fleet's trade destruction war, weakening the British control on the European market, and with the explosive war funds, huge military subsidies for each country, and worsening domestic economy. British taxes rose exponentially during the war. Britain's citizens, who were unable to withstand the taxes, staged massive protests and strikes, asking to stop the war immediately. Having defeated all his enemies on the continent, Napoleon announced a naval project and planned to build 50 of the latest battleships. British Admiral Horatio Nelson was killed in a fierce battle with the French, Spanish, Neapolitan, and Danish combined fleets. 8. The United States prepared for a new war, targeting the British colonies in the New World. Britain could no longer withstand it, and ended up signing a peace treaty with France. The other allies were able to conclude the end-of-war talks on light terms, but that was not the case for Britain, which had led the anti-French alliance from the beginning and resisted until the end. Britain had to face very humiliating and harsh demands to hand over the entire colonial land of the North American New World instead of being subject to compensation, tariff cuts, or patent adjustments. On February 2, 1805, 2 years and 3 months after the declaration of Nemours, Napoleon declared the end of the war. France was recognized by the leading powers as Europe's largest hegemony and world superpower. The French people proudly sang the anthem of the Republic and praised Napoleon. "I think I'm done with my work now. I have served my 10-year term, so I want to step down." In 1808, Napoleon declared his honorable retirement. All generals, ministers, bureaucrats, and even the media and the people hung on to him, but he resigned neatly, following George Washington's example, saying that more power would be no different from despotism. The last thing he did was to propose a referendum for a 5-year presidential term. After his retirement, the new government always sought out Napoleon, who was supported and loved by the whole French people. Napoleon had quietly retired to his hometown in Corsica and only intended to take command of the military in the case of a national crisis. He was therefore very upset by the government's attitude of asking for his opinion every time a new policy or bill was implemented. Napoleon eventually set out on a voyage to Louisiana. France's North American colonies, including Louisiana, which was returned from Spain and Canada, formerly controlled by Britain, were now larger than the entire Europe. The potential of this huge land is endless. France's future lies right here. The western part of the New World, which had yet to be pioneered, had been recognized by European powers as an implicit French territory. France's North American colonies still had enough room to expand and develop. Although the yellow fever and other infectious diseases had plagued the pioneers, they did not stop their enthusiasm. Napoleon decided to spend the rest of his life on this new land. Your Majesty, it's time for you to wake up. What kind of idiot calls me with the title of a monarch? Hearing the wrong title, Napoleon frowned at the man who was shaking and waking him up in the midst of extreme fatigue. How on earth are these attendants trained? Why, Your Majesty? The resentful face of the middle-aged man caught by the collar. He later found out that his name was Baron Fane, 9, and was Napoleon's secretary, belonged to a stranger he had never seen in his life. All the people around the middle-aged man were looking at him with surprised faces. Napoleon jumped out of his seat in a sense of discomfort piercing his whole body. Then he opened the curtains covering the carriage and closed them again. I don't know where this is, but I can see for sure that it's not New Orleans, Louisiana's top port city, where the Mississippi River meets the Gulf of Mexico to create a magnificent view. A thick, endless forest, the smell of fresh water, different from the sea, and a line of French troops. When he confirmed that this was the Niemen River, in Russian territory, Napoleon could only ask, "What the hell is this?" Kiel notes, "Hello. I will be adding wiki links, images, maps, and various information about characters, places, events, in this section under most chapters. If you are confused about something, or feel like I missed something or made a mistake, in the chapter or in the notes, please tell me in the comments or on the Discord server. There is always room for improvement, smiley face. Have a good read. 1. For more information, Napoleon Bonaparte. 2. Residences of the Austrian, Prussian, and Russian rulers. For more information, Schönbrunn Palace, Potsdam Sanssouci Palace, St. Petersburg Winter Palace. 3. War of the Second Coalition. 4. Archduke Karl, Duke of Teschen. 5. Alexander I of Russia. 6. William Pitt the Younger. 7. War of the Third Coalition. 8. Battle of Trafalgar.
9. Agathon Jean-François Fin.
Chapter 2. 1. Napoleon's Cry from the Middle of the Grasslands. 1. An expedition to Russia. It was definitely the largest project ever undertaken since the establishment of the French state on this land. A total of 680,000 people, 400,000 combat troops, and tens of thousands of tons of food. 150,000 war horses and transport horses, 8,000 carts and wagons. 800 artillery pieces, 750,000 artillery shells, 5 million ammunition guns, and 200 tons of gunpowder. Napoleon I, the Emperor of the French Empire, said, "If this huge mountain can move, it will be enough for Alexander I to raise a white flag. Without fighting, we will subdue our enemy." So if that is not a great victory, what is? If the grassland warriors bow to us, Britain can no longer continue the war. Most of Napoleon's advisors about the enemy and the operations disagreed. Napoleon's boast was not fulfilled. As if it had waited, Russia expelled the French ambassador, summoned the Cossack cavalry and commanders such as Barclay and Bagration, with a burning will to end the war. 1. France was now forced to wage war against the empire that ruled the vast grasslands. I'm telling you now, but I regret not giving more weight to Caulaincourt's words. 2. If so, we wouldn't have had such a disaster from the beginning. The emperor's adopted son and the rich king of northern Italy, Eugene de Beauharnais, said so in front of his most trusted commander, Jacques MacDonald. 3. Hundreds of horses and soldiers drowned, and the food they were carrying was flooded after a sudden collapse of a bridge built to cross the Neman River. 2 days ago, a storm had hit the campsite, damaging a considerable amount of supplies and killing more than 3,000 horses. To Eugene, these misfortunes seemed to be a sign of God. It was as if there were going to be a big tragedy on this expedition. You can only say that to me, Your Highness. No matter how much you care about His Majesty, he will never forgive you if you speak out against him when he is determined to fight. Eugene nodded silently. People become more and more stubborn as they get older, and Napoleon was like that. His stepfather did what he thought was right unconditionally and never gave up. It was an expedition that most people, including myself, opposed. Did His Majesty think that the Emperor's authority would be established only if he went against our will and prove us wrong? Of course, many of those who opposed this expedition were either intoxicated with too much Parisian social life or did not want to challenge more enemies because they thought they were already successful. However, Eugene and MacDonald did not sincerely oppose the expedition for such lazy reasons. They just thought that France had nothing to gain from a war with Russia. Even if they loyally devoted their bodies and minds to the expedition, if they did not accept it, it would only lead to despair and resignation. Eugene sincerely hoped that his stepfather, the emperor, would know that even if his whole body was burned by eternal fire, he would not bend his loyalty to the emperor, but others would not act like this. He remembered a native voodoo doctor he had met in a colony of the New World. Wearing a hat made of rhinoceros horns and painting with deer blood and oil paints, the voodoo doctor had told Napoleon an interesting story. We see the world as one giant system in which life pulsates, souls circulate, and bodies balance. We are always deeply and steadily exploring the rules and principles of the world with the wisdom of our ancestors. Therefore, we would like to inform our benefactor, former President of the Republic, of one truth and law that we have found. During his presidency, Napoleon sought to greatly ease oppression and discrimination against the natives of the North American New World, and to recognize them as members of the Society of the French Republic. After moving to Louisiana, Napoleon was not treated by the natives as a blood-sharing brother, but as a blood-sharing relative. This is not the end of the world that exists in the whole universe. Outside the world we live in, there are mysterious multidimensional layers of waves, and each of those huge waves has its own worlds. Their numbers are infinite. Among the infinite multidimensional infinite worlds, the worlds located in a straight line are particularly special. This is because we share the same time zone as the world we live in. We call it a parallel world. The parallel worlds exist indefinitely, isolated from each other, creating countless branches. This is the law of space dimension and origin. They produce hundreds of billions of different kinds of worlds in many different branches. For example, there could be a world in which Britain wins against France, and a world in which you, the former president of France, become the emperor instead of the president. At that time, Napoleon had thought that it was just one of the interesting principles of the New World folk beliefs and passed on. Napoleon, who was well versed in mathematics, science, and philosophy, was not a man who would listen to unproven things. But at this moment, what came to Napoleon's mind was what the native voodooist had called the law of the world. No matter how hard I think about it, all I can explain is that my soul and mind have passed over to another world. That old man, I'm sure he said interference between worlds was impossible. You don't know anything about exploration, do you? Then Napoleon muttered quietly and looked down at his body. He sighed. Originally in his world, Napoleon was a man who was in a much stronger physical condition than his age by repeating his healthy diet, exercise, and regular life. His moderately thin, lean body with elastic muscles had disappeared, and his slender legs and drooping sides welcomed him. He also regularly had serious coughs and fever. Sometimes it was accompanied by breathing difficulties. Napoleon knew right away that he was in such a shape and health that he would not live for more than a decade. How the hell was this guy taking care of his body? He did not hide his dissatisfaction and irritation with Napoleon Bonaparte of this world, who was the original owner of this body. Oh, by the way, he was a noble and honorable emperor. Napoleon snorted scornfully. Just sharing the name Napoleon Bonaparte is disgusting. Instead of Napoleon, this pig should have had a suiting name, like Paul Barras or Roger Ducasse. 4. Napoleon expressed his hatred for Napoleon of this world to the point where he recalled the specter of the presidential government that had been jealous of him and had tormented him. It had only been 3 hours since he came into this world, but Napoleon realized with his intuition. Now Napoleon had to worry about survival itself.
Kill notes. Et Piotr Bagration, Michael Andreas Barclay d'Ontollet.
2. Armand Augustin Louis de Caulaincourt was the French ambassador in Russia.
3. Eugene de Beauharnais, Etienne MacDonald.
4. Paul Barras, Roger Dukas. Chapter 3. 1. Napoleon's cry from the middle of the grasslands. 2. The first thing done by Napoleon Bonaparte of the otherworld, who had his soul transported into the body of Emperor Napoleon I, was ending this madness, the Russian campaign. The 400,000 troops crossing the Niemen River stopped moving at Napoleon's command and stood by. No, Napoleon could not understand how he could conquer a land thousands of kilometers away. How would we handle the huge supply of manpower if we pushed 400,000 troops into the vast, desolate land, rather than quickly hitting and sweeping a small number of captured elite troops like the old Mongol nomads? If Russia responded with scorched earth tactics and delayed tactics, we would have experienced hell. If I were a Russian general, that's what I would have done. The Swedish army, once Europe's strongest soldiers, was also destroyed by such Russian tactics. Despite knowing what happened in the past, do you still want to go that path that even beginners in strategy won't choose? Napoleon Bonaparte decided that the former owner of his body was a psychopath. There will be no Russian campaign. We will give up this useless expedition and return to Paris. At a military meeting where generals of the expeditionary army were gathered, Napoleon talked about withdrawal himself. Although there were many happy faces he was seeing after a long time, Napoleon knew best the importance and seriousness of this situation. If there were still idiots with futile dreams of an expedition to the east, he vowed to shower their burning will with a very strong rebuke. Whether we are doing the expedition or not, our commanders are ready to follow anything. Nevertheless, we are confident that your Majesty's decision is accompanied by courage and wisdom. I fully support your Majesty's choice. The war with Russia was only a loss to the empire. It's a wasteland where there's nothing to gain from conquering. This has stopped the empire from following the footsteps of Sweden and Poltava. We strongly support your Majesty's decision. We will be able to handle the Slavs in a different way. After all, the competent generals who remained in Napoleon's memory were not foolish. They knew how absurd and self-destructive this expedition was. After hearing what they said, he seemed to have decided to go against their will before the expedition. His anger soared against Napoleon of this world. Did he try to lead stubbornly this expedition against all his military experts and advisors? What the hell? We will make the army return as soon as possible. I also believe that your Majesty have made a truly right decision. Napoleon nodded as he looked at the handsome man in front of him. He was Eugene de Beauharnais. He was one of Napoleon's favorite talents. He seemed to have the same moderation and trust here. However, it was a little longer after learning that Napoleon in this world had a relationship with Josephine, Eugene's mother, and that he had even adopted Eugene as his son. Whoa, I'm relieved that your Majesty thought about everything.
I'm glad.
The war on the Iberian Peninsula has not ended yet and is showing signs of prolonging. No matter how strong the empire is, fighting on two fronts is too much. The whisper entered Napoleon's ears as he was about to lift himself up. Napoleon stopped moving at that moment and muttered unconsciously. The war on the Iberian Peninsula? Claude Victor Perrin and Nicolas Oudinot. 1. Among the 26 marshals of the military staff who thought the emperor had listened to them, immediately got up and apologized, but Napoleon's face, which was horribly hardened, showed no signs of loosening. All the advisors and generals gathered here, as well as Perrin and Oudinot, turned white. They knew well from experience that they would never see the light again if the emperor was in such a state. The atmosphere of the military council was rapidly freezing, but Napoleon, the mastermind, had no time to pay attention to it. The meeting is over. Everyone, stop the army from crossing the Niemen River and step back to the west bank. After that, we will discuss the future again. Getting up from his seat, Napoleon quickly headed for his barracks. You were also fighting a war on the Iberian Peninsula? You rotten pig-like Nabote, Napoleon's insulting nickname. You were determined to consume France. As soon as Napoleon arrived at the barracks, he searched his personal documents. He did not know anything about the current situation in France or internationally, so he went through letters and documents to learn about it. We've been at war since 1808. Our enemies are England, Spain, and Portugal. At least 200,000 casualties? You idiot. Napoleon could not control his rising anger. In the world where he originally lived, Spain was a faithful ally and friend of France. They were comrades who fought along the French allies and who shared the sweet fruits after victory. In some ways, the Spanish liked and praised Napoleon more passionately than the people of the mainland, France, and he treated the Spanish people right after the French. He was in the midst of making a personal decision with Spain on the fate of the nation. I think even allies can wage war if there is an issue where the national interests or diplomatic interests are greatly divided even after 100 concessions, and if sufficient gains in security are guaranteed through war. But the Iberian Peninsula War was not triggered for that reason. Napoleon almost fainted when he learned about the war on the peninsula, which had sent 200,000 French youths over the Styx River. No, you made Joseph Bonaparte too King of Spain, without any justification or lineage? Did you think the title of King of Spain was like the butler of a small palace? If Napoleon of this world had been in front of him, he would not have hesitated to shoot himself in the head with a musket. If you've started a war that doesn't make sense, you have to end it first before starting another. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of troops were recruited to go on a Russian expedition. He had a splitting headache. What had he done wrong to come to this world and endure this trouble?
Tiens notes. 1. Claude Victor Perrin, Duc de Belluno, Nicolas Oudinot.
2. Joseph Bonaparte, older brother of Napoleon. Chapter 4. 1. Napoleon's cry from the middle of the grasslands. 3. Napoleon was struggling to calm down the urge to kill Napoleon of this world. He called in Baron Fane, the chief secretary. He gave him orders after he rushed in. Send a messenger to Alexander I, saying that we have no intention of continuing the war with Russia. Let's be at peace with each other and go back to our previous agreement. Send the most competent diplomat you can find in the Republic, no, in the Empire, and persuade him well. For now, making peace with Russia was an urgent priority. Dozens of luxury carriages, pulled by 6 horses per vehicle, were moving in a row, creating dust clouds. The carriages were full of couriers, maids, bodyguards, artists, cooks, poets, horsemen, lovers, and other servants. In front of them, the flag symbolizing the French Empire fluttered in the wind. Damn, how many civilians do you have to take for one enemy? Did you have any thoughts about these people going to war? Almost a whole village seemed to be moving. Looking at the luxurious procession, Napoleon's stomach was burning. Yes, it was only natural in current European society for a high-ranking general to be followed by tales of that size when he left on an expedition. But Napoleon changed that obvious thing. When he was a general, Napoleon ate the same meal as the soldiers, slept in the same place, and led them from the same height. He broke all kinds of stereotypes, such as rapid military maneuvers, aristocratic sense of authority, and arrogant strategies to maintain military discipline. It made the military think only of efficiency and combat power. As a result, the French army led by Napoleon was able to reign as the best army in Europe. I have to change everything, from 1 to 10. Looking at Napoleon muttering with a grim look, the generals around him slowly pulled back. I'll have to clean up before that, right? All right. One corner of his mouth went up and he smiled. I'm not smiling, that damn nabote of this world. I'm going to work hard and put everything in order. The only one who can save Europe is His Majesty. And the only way is to oppose Napoleon. France's former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Talleyrand, 1, was a man who had even heard the voices of the second-in-command of the French Empire in the past. He said in a letter that he would fully stand on the Tsar's side and promised to respond within France. Only then did Alexander I have the courage to face Napoleon in full force. The war between Russia and France, 2 great empires, came to an end. Alexander I, Tsar of the Russian Empire, was staying in the city of Vilnius, the former capital of the Duchy of Lithuania. He had already received the news of the sudden stop of Napoleon's 400,000 soldiers in the Neman River basin instead of marching. We don't know what else the sly Napoleon will do. Why don't we stop the operation and watch the expedition's movement? They are consuming astronomical supplies every day. They must have a reason for not moving despite that. Alexander I considered his aides to be right and focused on figuring out the situation while waiting for the serfs coming from the eastern part of Siberia. The change happened the very next day. There was some intelligence that the French were packing up and retreating as if they were being chased by something, even though the full-scale inland advance had not begun. While staff officers drew question marks with puzzled expressions on their incomprehensible behavior, Alexander I thought, they're not trying to be sneaky, they're trying to go back because something unexpected happened. The French have sent an envoy. It seems that they are trying to promote peace with our country. Who is the envoy? It's Louis Chancelier for Foreign Affairs. Alexander I stroked his beard. He was the highest-ranking diplomat who served under Napoleon. Usually, on the first day of negotiations between countries, it was customary for low-class diplomats to visit each other first and then gradually increase their status. Calling the Minister of Foreign Affairs as a negotiator from the beginning turned Alexander I's doubts into conviction. There was something big going on in France. Since France finally broke peace and invaded the stronghold of our empire, it is impossible to make an agreement to just go back to how things were 2 months ago. I will state our conditions. Alexander I recited the negotiation proposal after a brief discussion with the advisors. 1. The complete withdrawal of the French troops from the territories of Prussia and Austria. 2. The independence and sovereignty of the Duchy of Oldenburg, which France annexed in 1810. 3. The acknowledgement of Russia's annexation of the Duchy of Warsaw. 4. The exception of Russia in the trade blockade with Britain. 5. 40 million francs to pay for Russia's border invasion. Whenever he heard each of the negotiation conditions, Louis Chancellier's heart burned black. The emperor had told him, if you think Russia's proposal to end the war is reasonable, accept it. You can make some concessions in the process. However, this was beyond the limits and could not belong to what the emperor had called a reasonable proposal to end the war. It was a proposal that would never be accepted by the French Empire. If I accept this, His Majesty and the citizens of Paris will never leave me alone. Louis Chancelier, whose face color did not change at all as an excellent diplomat even though he was getting sick from inside, quietly folded the paper. The eyebrows of Alexander I and the Russian diplomats, who were looking at him with sharp eyes, wiggled. Can I take that now as the official refusal of the French Empire? Yes, Your Majesty. We cannot accept these conditions at all. That's too bad. Then let's see each other on the battlefield. That's where we will decide who will cry and laugh at the end. When Louis Chancelier stepped down quietly, Alexander I ordered his entourage. Let's figure out what's going on in France right now. And contact Varna and Minsk. If you have a chance to strike Napoleon's tail, do it without delay. Tail notes.
1. Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Perigord.
Chapter 5. 1. Napoleon's cry from the middle of the grasslands. 4. The messengers sent by Alexander I, Tsar of the Russian Empire, arrived in Varina and Minsk a few hours later. At Varina, Barclay de Tolly, a commander of the Russian army, was currently under camp with 120,000 troops. In Minsk, Russia's proud commander General Pyotr Bagration I was standing by with 52,000 soldiers. The original purpose of the two corps was to control the speed of the French expeditionary forces advancing inland, cutting off subsequent units and supply units. However, as the situation changed, the operation was stopped and the French were watched closely. Prince Bagration, who was still sharpening the blade of revenge against the French, was delighted at the Tsar's command to pursue the French army that really seemed to be retreating, while General Barclay, who practically led the scorched earth tactics, looked disappointed. The French expeditionary forces have yet to suffer any damage. The French emperor is not just any enemy. He would have prepared for his retreat. What's the benefit of chasing after him? In order to reduce the amount of local supplies the French expeditionary forces could take, they had already carried out a devastating operation on the French expected march. If they stepped back and started chasing from here, wouldn't the devastating side disappear? But isn't this His Majesty's order? And if something really urgent happened to the French mainland, how much could Napoleon do? The grassland is the land of the empire. The Neman River area is also a place where the imperial army has conducted numerous maneuvers. Our army has an advantage in mobility and intelligence. It was the words of the staff officers who wanted to chase and fall back if they could not. General Barclay nodded his head after much thought and ordered his troops to be ready to move. Barclay made his way to Minsk. That landboy boat has been scrambling to capture the nation from the start of the war to the moment he reached the Neman River. If such a belligerent fellow is pulling back, there's probably a good reason. I'm sure he's not the type to retreat without setting up proper countermeasures. Bagration, originally stationed in Minsk, urged Barclay to act. The belligerent and straightforward Prince Bagration said Barclay's scorched earth tactics were no longer effective and that he should focus his efforts on chasing the expeditionary forces. The information is not clear yet. Napoleon is a deceptive genius. Remember to watch out for his sly head at any time. The general, who had been overly cautious since the beginning, was not popular among the Russian soldiers. As if to prove it, not only the officers of the Bagration Corps, but also the officers of the Barclay Corps, frowned slightly at General Barclay's words. Bagration made a fierce smile at the sight. The Empire, Russia, is a nation of beasts and warriors. Soldiers who are not brave will eventually be slaughtered. The late General Suvorov, too, always emphasized the bravery and recklessness of each soldier. You'd better remember what His Majesty really wants. Thank you for the advice. Barclay sighed quietly and shook his anger. He was only a general in name, filling the vacancy of Kutuzov, III, who had briefly stepped down from the front line. Feeling the sorrow of a foreign-born general, Barclay had to soothe his depressed heart. It was around the time that intelligence that Russian soldiers stationed in Varina were moving to Minsk arrived at the expedition. Napoleon was currently dealing with quite a nuisance. Your Majesty, forgive this marshal's disloyalty, but I can't go on without saying a word about this. Isn't this different from what we promised to the Polish people? Since he became Napoleon of the world, Napoleon diligently collected various information by reading letters, documents, and reports, and was lucky to know who was in front of him. Józef Antoni Poniatowski, IV, a member of the Polish royal family that had fallen into ruin, was confident in taking a position among the 26 marshals under Napoleon. He was a complete stranger in the other world. Napoleon had always emphasized his friendship with the Empire of the Frozen Land, Russia, so he had refrained from doing things that could provoke Russia. Of course, he had never dreamed of liberating Poland, but it seemed that the nobody in this world had acted differently for a long time. He had intelligence making him believe that an alliance against Russia would be properly maintained after making the Duchy of Warsaw. And what else did you promise before your expedition? Well, I'm sorry, Duke, but from the beginning, this expedition was stupid, burdensome, and I only realized it now. I'm not sure I can keep my promises right now, but I'll give you a reasonable reward somehow. So I want you to trust me in France and wait. Poniatowski had run energetically, arguing, but he had never thought the proud emperor would apologize so gently. Rather, the Duke of Warsaw, who had a look of surprise, bowed his head in a hurry and replied, "Oh no, Your Majesty, this marshal was too hasty. I had no intention of questioning the sincerity of the emperor. But, if the expedition has been cancelled, what should our duchy and the military do now?" The Duchy of Warsaw was the second largest country after France, with about 90,000 troops on this expedition. There must have been tremendous financial and administrative bleeding just by recruiting these soldiers. Napoleon felt very sorry. Thank you for understanding. However, I haven't ordered yet the dissolution of the expeditionary force. We've already thrown the cheese, and soon the mice will come. Don't you think we should catch the rats? If they sign the agreement without even fighting, they're not Russian. The people who ate foie gras knew, and Napoleon, who had dealt with Russia many times, knew it well. Alexander I would show his face to the negotiating table in a big and proper way. Thiel notes. 1. Here's a painting of Pyotr Bagration and of Michael Andreas Barclay de Tolly, both by George Daw. Bagration and Barclay. 2. Alexander Suvorov. 3. Mikhail Kutuzov.
4. Józef Antoni Poniatowski.